Thank you. Thank you. Let's get started. All right, so practice, as you guys have seen, is one of the factors that can actually influence your reading speed. But there are more, right? So for instance, the size of the copy and the distance that you see in it actually might make you slower if you see something that is really far from you, right? The angle that you have in comparison to the copy that you're trying to read will also influence it. So if you're seeing in virtual reality or in the real world and you go over 15 degrees, it might be too askew. It might be actually pretty hard to read. The legibility of your typeface also matters, right? Like we could use certain fonts, typefaces to use on display, and that looks amazing on headlines. But again, if you try to use something like this on, let's say, a body of copy, it might not work, right? You start missing the ligatures. You start missing the right amount of contrast, that will actually distinguish, one characters versus another. Text, the line length is also important. I mean, the recommendation, it really depends on the medium, but it's about 60 characters. And that is 2 to 3 alphabets. And it's not that you cannot read a long line. It's only that when you actually get to the end, and when I come back, you might get lost if the line is pretty long. Contrast, I feel like at this point, everybody is pretty aware of this one. According to the World Health Organization, there are over 200 million people that suffer either moderate or some sort of severe vision impairment. By actually creating more contrast between foreground and background, you make sure whatever the copy that you're using is actually visible for everybody. So for instance, this is surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, easier to see than if we actually have a copy in white. The colors and the illumination in where your copy is actually perceived and read actually somehow has an influence in how that is seen. And that is mainly because it relies on each person capabilities and how the amount of colors they can perceive to actually hit that contrast ratio or not. So this is, for instance, how normal people perceive a regular range of ultraviolet colors. But again, if you suffer or are under condition of what's called protanopia, this is how you will see the same range of colors. This is deuteranopia, which is the red color deficiency. And this is finally Topia, which is the blue and yellow color deficiency. Different people have different capabilities. There's no such thing as normal when we're actually evaluating our human capabilities. We're all unique and exceptional. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Claudio Guglieri. I'm extremely excited to be here. So I want you to join me on a round of applause to the awards organization and everybody that made this thing possible. So let's give it up. All right. Woo-hoo. So excited. All right, so that's me, with a good night of sleep. Not today. My kids didn't let me sleep much, but let's do this, right? My name is Claudio Guglieri. I'm a graphic designer. I'm also a creative director, meaning I work with other graphic designers trying to, help them get better. I've been extremely lucky to work with a bunch of cool and interesting clients over the course of my career. It's been a mix of, being the right place, the right moment, and not screwing up. So it's important to say that. And right now, I'm working, and for the past few months, I joined Huge Oakland. So Huge is a digital shop based, honestly, in a bunch of different locations in the US. We're based in Oakland. You should check our work. If you're interested or if you're looking for a new gig, I'm happy to have that conversation as well. Here you can see, again, my website, my Instagram, my Twitter. Today, I don't really want to talk about my work, and that's not the purpose of being here. I want to talk about something that I'm really fascinated by, and that is how our human abilities influence somehow the relationship we have with the world around us and how they actually define our experience in digital environments. So in this short talk, what I'm going to do is basically cover these three what I believe are the most relevant human abilities that we should consider for our work, when creating digital content. And this is especially relevant because of, three reasons. The first one is, there's no such thing as an experience that lives in a computer anymore. You don't sit down and live a whole experience. We basically what we're doing, what we're designing, is span across different devices, different inputs, and different senses. So in all these different contexts in which our work can be perceived, we need to find common ground. And that is ultimately the people that are actually experiencing these different products. The second reason is, again, consumer technology has had staggered evolution. I would say in the past decade or maybe more, and there's no rules to it. It comes down to capitalism and the rules of market. But if we basically rely on what we're getting from the Apples of the world, the Facebook of the world, and if we rely our creativity and our capability to lead into those kind of releases, we're always going to be chasing. We're never going to be leading. It's important to remember that our human abilities are finally what channels everything. So let's look at that instead of the technology to define our work. And finally, it's a great time to be a designer. It has never been this easy to get in, learn from a bunch of different people, actually use tools for free. Never that easy. However, each tool comes with its own, I'll say, its own way of working. I really like this quote from Milton Glaser. He says that the computer is a perverse machine because it forces you to work the way it wants to work. So it's important to actually take a step back, not necessarily limit ourselves by what we can do with the tools that we know, and we look, just look at what us as humans are wired to do naturally and are capable of doing beyond the technology or the tools that we can use to build those experiences. All right, so I'm going to focus in three different experiences or capabilities that I want to go over with you today. The first one is our body, the motor system related abilities. Second one, our vision. And third one, basically our cognitive abilities. And I'll focus on memory, attention, and our capacity of learning, cognitive load. Let's start with our body. I have a short video for you guys. That's crazy. Oh, man. Anyway, our body is super flexible, right? With the right training, you could do a bunch of different stuff. However, when it comes to actually interacting with systems for hours, we tend to resort back to what feels comfortable. And that's not necessarily what feels comfortable, right? So these few ranges, if we look at them, a few examples of those are, how much we can move our head, again, in a comfortable manner for hours. We can move it like 30 degrees back, according to the research, and 45 degrees forward, or 25 degrees to both sides. If we pay attention to our hands, again, limited ranges of motions where we can actually perform these actions for hours, right? So 55 degrees going up, and only 46 degrees going down. And then if we look at the radial deviation, only like 15 degrees to one side, 25 degrees to the other side. Our body is fairly limited, right? And if you guys have used like virtual reality experiences for a while, you might realize how after a while you get a little bit tired, right? So comfortably, we can actually move our body 21 degrees to both sides, and our hand, as in our arm, from our shoulder, 60 degrees and 25 degrees forward. It's interesting that we can do much more, but again, it's all about repetition and how comfortable you feel. Our hands, they actually experience fatigue pretty soon as well. Anyone that has had like an XL or like plus phone and tried to use it in a subway might know this already. But again, our hands is ultimately how we interact with these digital environments voluntarily. And again, there's only a range of motion where we feel comfortable. We can move our thumb from our index 90 degrees in a comfortable manner. We can move our index from the rest of the fingers also 90 degrees. And you know this graphic at this point already. It gives you a good sense of like what is a stretch, meaning what you wouldn't be able to do for hours versus what feels pretty comfortable. And I feel like I have to say these things because I know many designers that somehow landed on this industry out of being exposed and fascinated by all this like UI and sci-fi interfaces that we're exposed with every single Marvel movie that comes out, right? All this inspiration, it's amazing, right? It helps push the plot, the story forward when we see these movies. But again, just try to do this for hours. Imagine if you have to like raise your arms every time you want to move something from one surface to another, or if you saw the Iron Man movie there, if every time you have to open a menu, you have to like extend your arms like that, right? It's like, put myself in the situation, it's like 2 a.m., I don't want to wake up anybody, just doing work, and it's like, oh, fuck, open the menu. It's too much. And this goes beyond movies, right? So if, there's also this connection between marketing and reality. These are some clips like from a while ago when the Xbox Kinect was released and also the Nintendo Wii, right? Like, look at the enthusiasm. It's incredible. If you guys, if you ever experience Nintendo Wii or the Kinect, you know that it's not quite like this. It's a little bit closer to something like this. So I feel like we all, they're not even moving. It's incredible. All right, that's pushing it. This is going crazy. We all had that friend that the first week they were like, oh my God, I'm playing tennis. It just feels like the real thing. And 1 week later they were, barely moving. Our body, apart from how lazy you might be or not, our body always resorts back to what feels comfortable. And again, this is about performing the same task for hours. So with that in mind, should we become like personal trainers, like the CrossFit of like digital experiences here? Should we train our users to like do more? You can reach this angle with your thumb. Probably not, right? Like our role really should be limited to like, again, increasing efficiency and accuracy in what our users can do within a comfortable range. So with that in mind, how can we increase accuracy and the speed? We should take a look at our finger size. And our fingers are pretty chunky. They're, on average, our index finger is like 1.6 to 2 centimeters. Sorry, I don't do inches, but less than 1 inch, I think. And our thumb goes from it's approximately like 2.5 centimeters width, as in the tappable area, right? The big corporations somehow define, human guidelines. Sorry, started there. To like how designers should actually use this to develop and design new interfaces. So, for instance, I think Microsoft is like 48 points, and Apple goes down to like 44. But that's gigantic, and the reality is like no one really is really using it because we don't have to. So this is Instagram, right? Only the main navigation at the bottom kind of like hits the mark and 44. Everything else goes like half or even less than that. And no one is really complaining. I mean, I've used Instagram, and I made mistakes trying to type in someone's name and get into something else. I'm like, fuck. But at the end, you get used to it, and you only get better and better. When it comes to our hands, we also should be looking at how can we use them for indirect interaction. And they turn out to be not great at pointing. Our hands are great at doing real things like pushing, pulling, grabbing, moving. That's what our hands were somehow conceived for, not necessarily tapping or pointing at things that are really, really far in a really accurate manner. In fact, if you try to, again, using lip motion, for instance, trying to point at something and confirm in any way with the same hand, that small movement, 10 feet from where you are, becomes a big deal. And suddenly you start missing the mark. So, with that in mind, there's, again, lots of research around it. This inaccuracy is a well-known issue. Everybody wants to move away from using controllers on virtual reality environments. This is a good example from lip motion from last year, where trying to, again, increase accuracy, they're using different signals, right? So they're, using your hand as in what you're pointing at, the position of your shoulder, and they're doing and finding the average with your gaze. Again, ways to somehow make sure users don't make that many mistakes, and their actions are somehow accurate. And we don't need to limit ourselves to digital environment. This is an example I'm not totally allowed to show, so I blurred the hell out of it. But it's a physical, in a physical environment. Again, what if we could read other signals? What if we could actually track our eyes? And in this case, I was looking at different objects, and I was surprised that actually, as soon as I was looking at one, the system detected I was looking at it, and suddenly you get this sound and visual kind of response out of it. There's so much we can do that we're not even grasping when it comes to our motor system abilities and increasing accuracy by mixing signals. This is a well-known example from last year. Again, using AR Kit, looking at your eyes and being able to triangulate what you're looking at on the screen. And this is another example from Microsoft, where they have this series of anticipatory techniques that, again, is a version of air hovering, where basically the interface can morph, if you're actually expressing somehow intent by hovering a specific surface. Just imagine all the principles and guidelines that we have when we're designing an app. What if we could forget about the static UI? This is where the menu is. This is where things are supposed to be. And we could actually start understanding better all the signals that we actually put in place when we interact with our devices. Design could be so much different. Strange at first, but hopefully more efficient as we get used to it. All right, so this is when it comes to motor system-related abilities, right? So how can we use this information next Monday when you guys go back to work? The most important thing here is to consider the direction and ranges that are more comfortable for repeated motion. Don't go too far if you're designing physical spaces or VR experiences, because again, it will result in specifically this notion of gorilla arm syndrome, where you start feeling fatigue and some sort of muscle ache. Design for inaccuracy. This is true for everybody. It's not about, people would always make mistakes, but it's not about it's not about the mistakes that they make, but about how forgiving our system that we're designing is. And finally, use all the information that we have available, and again, consider mixing signals. Get out of the specifics of a design as it comes in rigid blocks that you're supposed to place into a layout. It doesn't have to be that way. All right, so that was motor system reliabilities. I want to talk next about our vision. Our vision it's incredible, right? Ultimately, it's one of the most important senses that we have. We perceive up to 80% of the signals that your brain gets through our sight. And if any other sense will fail, let's say you wouldn't be able to smell or hear, your vision will still be pretty compelling at defending you from, from a survival skill perspective from a predator. So With that in mind, if we look at the somehow capabilities of our eyes, we're able to actually recognize images at a 1/220th of a second. And this is the result of the US Army in pilots. They play this video up to 220 frames per second. Only one frame is one object. Pilots in this research were able to actually describe and talk about the objects they just saw. Our binocular vision, which is our 3D vision that we see with both eyes, goes up to 120 degrees. Our central vision, which is where we see sharp, is only 2 degrees, which doesn't seem like a lot. But if you consider that you can move your eye up to 900 degrees per second, it's okay. And finally, our brain has the best content-aware field feature that you can encounter out there. Photoshop has nothing to do with it. So if we look at our field of view, again, our field of view is horizontally 200 degrees, vertically 130 degrees, which is, a lot. Of all that, the only thing that you are able to see sharp is this 2 degrees in the middle of it. This is where you have, in your cornea, the largest amount of receptors. And this is what we use to do things like driving, reading, looking at something in detail, and so on. This area is really, really small, and just so you get a sense of what it's like, it's basically the equivalent of looking at your thumb extending your arm. That's all you can see sharp. Everything else is not in focus. If we increase a little bit the range, 30 degrees, 15 on each side, is basically the most optimal space, according to, again, the US Army research, where we actually can recognize icons and symbols. So when you're actually designing, let's say, a cockpit for a jet, this is where they recommend you put things like any type of iconography or symbols they might be able to, or they might need to recognize immediately. So really good at that. Increasing this, we go to our peripheral vision at this point, and this goes to 60 on each side, so 120 degrees. This is basically the limits of what your nose is letting you see, right? If you actually keep looking to the side, your nose will block your eye. This is like that area. This area, again, doesn't seem anything focused, but is really, really good at recognizing patterns. This is what gets the gist out of everything, right? This is what, the rules of the Gestalt get applied here. You can recognize patterns. You can recognize, like common fate if you're looking at motion. You can get a sense of, is this a pleasant composition? Or what am I looking at? Is this crazy bananas, or is this pretty straightforward, without necessarily looking at it with your central vision? And if we increase it even more, at this point, we don't see in 3D anymore because you only have one eye. And this area is not good for anything else other than detecting motion. This comes back to our survival skills. So if you just put your hand right here, I don't know what's going on, but it's making me nervous. Something is moving there. I feel like I should do something about it. This is, again, the most sensitive area to motion in our field of view, which is really, really interesting. All right. So we go from the center, and as we expand, we lose capabilities, right? What does it mean for users that might be looking at, let's say, a website? So again, when you look at a website, you're never that far from the screen. So you're not really, we shouldn't worry too much about the far peripheral field of view. However, you need to assume that people are not necessarily going to see everything at once. They only see these 2 degrees, and they keep scanning and moving their eyes everywhere to actually get a gist of what's going on. There's certain, certain, I don't want to say rules, but there's certain knowledge that says that, we have a part of the brain that is only in charge of recognizing faces. So some theories said that, faces drag our attention. The first thing that we see is we go to whatever the face is on a surface. But again, depending on how you, or where you were, where you were raised and whatnot, you might start from the top left, you might start from the top right, you might start from the bottom, you might start from the side. It's really, depending on what you're used to. But just so you know, nobody actually sees the whole side at first. You just scan it quickly, and then you get the gist of it. A layout like the New York Times, the gist of it means it's holy shit, this is really clutter. Which, again, it serves the purpose of what they're trying to do. But again, it requires that scanning to be efficient, and you don't always know what's going on each side just because there's too much going on. When it comes to VR, our vision, this is a different beast, right? Because VR right now, most devices that are out there only allow for 100-degree horizontal field of view. And the resolution is the equivalent to having an iPhone this close to your face. So the resolution is not actually great. That means you're not able to see things that are really small because you have less pixels to actually define that. Because of that, everything is huge. So you have like these huge blocks, really limited field of view. You end up moving your neck and your eyes quite a lot. So you get to experience fatigue sooner than you will interacting with information in the real world. So basically, our eyes have to work a lot. But again, it would only get better. So if we try to come up with a theory about how we digest information, there are like tons of ideas around directing the user's eye from one place to another. But it really depends on the purpose of the design, right? If you're creating something artistic, it's all about creating an emotion. It's not about scanning information. But if you're creating something that might be more functional, that's the moment where you actually have to pay more attention. So it really, the bottom line is like it really doesn't matter. The eye can take it all. There's no cognitive overload or link to the fact that you have to move your eyes quite a lot. So again, I see a lot of websites these days with navigation everywhere, top, bottom, left, right. If the purpose of it is to create that emotional connection, go crazy. It doesn't matter. There are no rules you can apply to art. However, if you're trying to create something, you can go crazy. If you're trying to create something that, again, is meant to be used over and over by people that are not necessarily experts or are there to browse your site, that's when we actually need to be a slightly more traditional, probably, or like less edgy on how we place items around the screen. I did this quick prototype on Framer, trying to emulate, what we'll feel as saying we have only these 2 degrees sharp and everything else is blurry. What will feel if I actually will be able to direct your eyes? You can see how a Medium article, suddenly, again, you never get the gist of it by scanning everything. You're only reading the content, which is what matters. But even here, you can clearly see the different blocks of content and get an understanding of what that is without even looking at it, which ultimately, people that don't work in this industry, they go to the web to digest content. All right, so wrapping this up, how can we use this information, when you're back in the office on Monday? The bottom line here is always know when to break the rules. Again, RC compositions can be as crazy as you want. You're trying to create an emotion. But if what you're doing is a bit more functional, you need to start basically leveraging this central vision that digests information with the peripheral area that gets the gist out of it and somehow is teaching users how to operate. Second one, focus the attention on the content. Nobody comes to a website to browse the navigation. Nobody comes to a website to try to find your email address. The more, the more simplicity we can achieve in getting to those simple tasks, the better, obviously. And finally, I didn't touch much on this, but if you think about motion, this adds a whole different dimension to it. There's a notion of orchestrating your compositions and somehow directing the user's attention from one place to another as they're browsing the content. That is so powerful, and it's almost like a dance. When you get to the right kind of dance from one element to another, it just feels really good. So something that you should consider if, again, you tend to incorporate a lot of motion in your work. Alrighty, so that was motor system related abilities. I talked about vision. I'm going to wrap it up with the cognitive set of abilities. So cognitive abilities refer to basically the core skills that your brain uses when you're trying to think about something, remember, somehow find a rationale to something, pay attention, or even learn. Right? Cognitive abilities basically facilitate learning, and that's why they're so important for us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about attention, memory, and cognitive load. When it comes to attention, again, the research says that we have around 8, give or take, seconds of transient attention. This is our response to a stimulus, like something does, a really loud sound. You look at it, you hold your attention for max 8 seconds. If you actually make a conscious effort of sustaining that attention, you can go from 5 to 20 minutes. So eventually, after 20 minutes, you just disconnect. There's nothing wrong with that. It's your brain telling I need a breather. Just look at your phone, talk to somebody, I don't know, look at the sky. It's normal and it's expected. When it comes to our memory, we have this notion of working memory, and it can hold from 10 to 15 elements. And think about this as the RAM memory in a computer. This is what you use to go through life. You just came to this venue, now you know where the bathroom is. At first, you just scan the room and you're like, okay, it might be there. This is what you use to function on regular life. And this kind of like working memory can hold from 7, give or take, 7 to 9 items at once. If you make the conscious effort of holding something longer in your memory, it starts transferring to what's known as the long-term memory. And the capacity of it is infinite, which is great. So I want to ask you something. I play a video at the very beginning, right? Let's see if you remember. How many words per minute does an adult read on average? Is it 250 words, A, B, 300, or C, 350? You need to be louder. B? Look at that. That's awesome. You guys are paying attention. This is great. All right. So let's talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load is the amount of mental effort that you need to use to actually complete a new task or learn new things. And it totally leverages your working memory. Cognitive load can be actually an enhancing element of learning if you actually work right with your working memory. But if you force it too much and suddenly users have to remember more things than they're used to before it transfers to the long-term memory, you get to cognitive overload. And at that point, they totally drop the task. It's not working anymore. So cognitive load is divided in 3 parts. It has like 3 different layers. I care about the third one. The first one is intrinsic, how difficult something is. The germane layer, the work that you need to put into creating a permanent store of knowledge, like a schema of what you're learning. And the one that we as designers can actually affect, that is the extraneous layer. And that is how tasks are presented. So think about this, right? Like a client comes to you or in your company, suddenly there's a goal. It seems extremely complicated. Your job really comes down to like understand the task, simplify it, and package it in a way that in which other people can actually understand it and digest it. This is what many of us does for a living. The capacity of learning basically uses this working memory, but the more you can leverage from your long-term memory, it gets easier and easier. So think about a doctor. A doctor that has performed the same procedure over and over for 1,000 times is going to be really, really good at even identifying new aspects of it, new nuances of it, because they don't have to go over what they know. But if they're actually doing the first, this specific procedure for the first time, they're going to be paying attention to so many things that, other things might slip through, which is not a good thing. And the bottom line of our learning capacity is that there are no limits to it. We can learn everything. I hate when people kind of like shut down and say, I'm just not a computer person. What do you mean by that? I mean, everything can be learned. Even Cinema 4D can be learned if you actually spend enough hours on it. I get a few laughs of people that have suffered. So I want to tell you an example, right? Consider this is one Spider-Man game that came out in 1982. Again, it's a game. It feels like fun. It's pretty simple. Only thing that you need to play is a joystick and a button. That's it, pure fun. If you want to play the latest Spider-Man that came out last year, well, you're going to have to deal with a slightly different situation. We've gone from 1 joystick and 1 button to 3 joysticks, 17 buttons, and a touchpad. This is crazy shit. This is like, this is work. And this is like every AAA game is, gets there, right? Like the Xbox Elite controller has 22 buttons. I mean, it's unbelievable. Actually, I started playing Spider-Man again a couple of weeks ago, and there's always this moment of like, oh my God, I haven't played this thing in a year, and now all these bad guys are like coming at me. I don't know what to do. I had to Google it. Another example is this one. This is kind of like a survival skill type of game called Scum. And you can see you can control everything. I mean, you can even control the calorie intake of this guy. I mean, there's just so much work there that it's better if you just turn off your computer and just go and work out. Just put that energy somewhere else. It's gonna be better for you. It's a bit crazy. All right. So how can we actually use this information at work? Our capacity of learning, our cognitive load, attention, and memory. The first thing is, as much as possible, leverage the user's previous knowledge to minimize this content overload and ambiguity. If you're dealing with tasks that require a lot of learning, leverage as much as you can, patterns and paradigms that they might already be familiar with. Second one is, again, consider progressive disclosure. This is pretty straightforward. And almost establishing learning goals as they're using this UI. Just because otherwise you're overwhelming and hitting the top of the working memory, and then it doesn't quite work. You can actually get there through practice. All right, so that was motor system reading abilities, human vision abilities, and cognitive abilities. At the very beginning of this talk, I asked, how far can we actually push it? And to answer the questions, I'll say, nothing is impossible. We can do amazing things. The sky is the limit. It's just really important to understand that to whatever we're trying to accomplish, there's always a path to it. Small, and that is true to our vision abilities, our dexterity, even tiny targets, you get used to it through practice. You just need to put that path in place. Second one is everything can be learned. There's nothing impossible, nothing we cannot learn, regardless of your age. At least it hasn't been scientifically proved. And the third one is our abilities change over time. And again, we might not be as good as we used to be in terms of our short-term memory. It took me a couple of years to learn my wife's phone number. I know it now. But we're really good at other things. We're really good at multitasking. We're really good at storing pieces of knowledge. We're really good at finding the connection between different, again, content structures and actually making sense out of it. All right, so these are some, not necessarily all the rules, but these are some of the rules that are out there when it comes to our capabilities. Now the only thing I can guess is that I hope that you break them, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Thank you so much.